Welcome to the 2020 Black Women Lawyers Association of Michigan Voter Education Special. I'm Tracey Martin, and today you'll learn the when, the where, and hows of voting, and you'll learn what's on the ballot. You'll also learn the importance of voting for judges and for state representatives and for Congress and Senate and all manner of offices in Michigan and beyond. And you'll also learn about filling out the census and voter suppression. So here's how it works. We're going to do this in two parts. The first half, joining me will be the Honorable Kameshia D. Gant of 6th Judicial Circuit Court in Oakland County for a special one-on-one where we'll welcome questions. I think we'll also be taking a few questions from the Black Women Lawyers Association of Michigan Facebook page, and we have received some questions in advance. And so this is your opportunity to hear from the judge, who I believe is also a candidate herself, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then the second half will focus on voter suppression in America, the history of it. And we'll climb into my little time machine, and then we'll fast forward today. So today's voter education special is brought to you by the Black Women Lawyers Association of Michigan. It is an organization that endeavors to promote reform of the law, to facilitate the administration of justice, and to uphold the highest standard of integrity in the legal profession. BWLAM also strives to cultivate a spirit of cordiality and fellowship among members of the bar and also our community at large. And that is why BWLAM is bringing you this special today. I do want to thank Chandrika Simmons. She's our past president. I am a member of Black Women Lawyers Association of Michigan as well. And she's the current treasurer, executive board member, and she's in the control room handling things on StreamYard for us. And I'd also like to thank the entire executive board of Black Women Lawyers Association of Michigan, including the president, Rita White, Vice President Robin L. McCoy, parliamentarian Delicia Coleman Morrison, and our social media and comms officers, Esther Harris and Stephanie White. And a special thank you to the BWLAM Foundation as well for all of its support. So let's get right to it. I am very pleased and very honored to introduce to you today Judge Kameshia D. Gant of 6th Judicial Circuit Court. She was appointed to Oakland County Circuit Court by our governor, Gretchen Whitmer last year. And interestingly enough, on May 17, 2019, Judge Gant was sworn in as the 75th Oakland County Circuit Court judge by the Honorable Shalina D. Kumar before her family, friends, and colleagues. This date also marked the 15-year anniversary of her graduation from Wayne State University Law School and the 65th anniversary of Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka, a landmark 1954 Supreme Court case in which the justices ruled unanimously that racial segregation of children in public schools is unconstitutional. Welcome, Judge Gant. How are you this Saturday?
Oh, I'm great. I'm great. And thank you, Ms. Martin. And I thank the Black Women Lawyers Association of Michigan for hosting this wonderful Voters Edition. Voters Education Edition for the People's Law School. I think this is a needed forum to inform the people of all the things they need to know to vote in this election.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, how was your Juneteenth?
You know, I had a great Juneteenth. You know, I took some time. I did some hearings in the morning because I'm working remotely, but then I spent the afternoon giving back to my community. So I joined a variety of different organizations, the Southfield Lathrop Democratic Club and the Southfield Police Department. And we were at the Southfield Civic Center giving out food boxes to the people in the community. So that's how I spent my Juneteenth.
Very nice, very nice. Well, Judge, we're going to get right into it. You know, this is election cycle 2020. There's so much at stake. And I think that we're at a time when voting and participating in the process is really at the top of people's minds for lots of different reasons, for lots of different people. And I want to open the discussion by asking, why do you think voting is important?
Voting is important because it's actually one of the most basic rights that we have, that we underutilize. Every citizen in this country has the right to vote. And voting gives us a chance to express our opinion. Voting gives us a chance to participate in our democracy and to hold elected officials accountable for their actions while they're in office. So the power of the people is in their vote. And so I urge everyone to exercise this right.
Thank you, Your Honor. Yes, I've always found voting myself to be personally empowering. I've never missed an election. And I know some people are of the opinion that when they vote, they think that things don't change, but that has never been my experience. And I think everyone would agree that this year there's just so much at stake and there's so much to vote for that people are going to want to participate in the process and get engaged. But the first step toward voting is, of course, the registration process. And so you may notice there is a countdown clock behind me, and that countdown clock is ticking down to the Michigan primary. We're only 44 days and a few hours away. And let's see, I have another countdown clock for the general election, and we're exactly 135 days, 12 hours, 53 minutes, and 31 seconds, Your Honor, until the national election in November. So how would people register to vote? What is their first step? Especially, let me put it in context. You said that you're doing Zoom hearings. That's because we're in the middle of a pandemic and courthouses are closed. So how can people register to vote?
Well, there's a variety of different ways that you can register to vote. And I want everybody to know that there are even means for you to register to vote through Election Day. You can go to your city or township clerk's office, and you can register to vote at your clerk's office. You can register to vote by obtaining an application by mail and mailing it in. You can register to vote online, and you can register to vote in a number of different ways. They make it very convenient in this day and age for individuals to register to vote. There are even registration drives that are going on that individuals can go to register to vote. It's extremely important that everybody participates in this process. Everyone has a voice, and your one vote could make the difference.
I totally agree, Your Honor. We know that in the past, throughout history, there have been elections that have been decided, on margins closer than this, razor thin, and every vote counts. I myself participated in a ballot recount once, and it was just a fascinating process. And I saw firsthand how every single vote counted, and it does make a difference. So I would also add that, because we're in a pandemic, there's a lot of talk about voting by mail, the absentee ballot. And if people want to register to vote or to get an application for an absentee ballot, they have got to remember this website in Michigan, michigan.gov/SOS. That stands for not Save Our Souls, but Secretary of State. For some people, it's saving their souls by voting, taking their souls to the polls. But you cannot forget that. I'm going to be repeating that throughout this broadcast because really, I checked it out myself, Your Honor, the other day. And I went on there to see if, how my registration looked. I'm registered. And I don't know if you received an application to vote absentee.
I did. Actually, all Michigan voters received an application, all registered voters received an application to vote by mail. So we have that option, especially in this day and time. With COVID-19, we had to do things a little bit differently. And voters shouldn't be suppressed. Their votes shouldn't be suppressed. We should make it very convenient and easy for people to exercise their right to vote. And so individuals who were registered received an application to vote by mail. And you can also, on that application, check the box and become a permanent absentee voter. And then they will send you the application or, the form on each election. So I would encourage people to do so. It's a safe way to vote.
Fantastic, fantastic. And so, when I went onto the Michigan Voter Information Center on michigan.gov, I was actually able to not only check out the status of my application for absentee, which, by the way, I received the application and I did send it out, but I have not received the ballot yet. And as I understand it, the ballots will be hitting mailboxes next week. Was
That's
that
my
your understanding?
understanding. Yes,
Yes.
that's my
So
understanding.
that's good to know. And then,
Oh, I think we lost sound.
I'm back. I've got to say, I've been doing a number of these Zoom hearings and for court and Zoom seminars. And today we're on StreamYard, and there's always these technical glitches, but we keep rolling with it. So my apologies, Your Honor, for that. So we'll just keep rolling. And so I just want to say I did get a sample ballot and up on the online Michigan Voter Information Center, and it has all of the races. So I found that to be very, very helpful. And so voters can register to vote online. And then we have another question here, Your Honor. We talked about the primary and the general a moment ago. Someone wants to know, what is the difference between the primary and the general election in 2020?
In general, the primary elections are for the partisan races for the voters to elect their candidate that's going to move on to the general election. But sometimes you get some contested races in the primary election. And so nonpartisan positions can participate in the primary election as well. So in your primary election, you are going to choose from your state representatives. You're going to choose, there are candidates for the prosecutor's office that are vying for the position to move on to the general election so that they can be voted by the people in November. So, but occasionally, because judges are nonpartisan, you'll get a race where there are more than two individuals running for a particular position, and then they have a primary election as well. So there are a variety of different candidates in the primary election. And so you're choosing those candidates that are going to move on to the general election. And then in the general election, it's nationwide, and the nation votes from the top of the ticket to your local elections.
Right. And so you're actually on the ballot this election cycle as well, correct?
I am. I do not have a primary. I am unopposed for my position to retain my seat at the Sixth Circuit Court. There are three different positions for the Sixth Circuit Court. There are the incumbent judges that are running in a pack, and there is the incumbent partial term, which is my seat, and I am unopposed for that. So I'll move on to the November election. So I'll be on the ballot November 3rd. But there are candidates that are running for an open seat at the Sixth Circuit Court, and so they do have a primary election.
I see. So there will be a primary in Sixth Circuit Court for the open seat. Okay.
And it's my understanding Wayne and Oakland County will have a primary.
Yes, I do know for a fact that Wayne County for Third Circuit Court will have a primary. There are a number of individuals running for a seat, an open seat. And as I understand it, there are two open seats in Wayne County Third Circuit. So as I understand it from the primary, there will be four individuals moving forward to the general election. So hotly contested race. And what is so interesting about that race is that you actually have an individual running for judge who sat on the bench once before in a Third Judicial Circuit Court, Mary Beth Kelly. and she went all the way up to the Michigan Supreme Court, but then she left to go to Bodman. And, I practice in Wayne County Third Circuit quite often, and I ran into the judge and I said, Judge, what are you doing here? And she said, well, I'm a visiting judge, and apparently she has missed being on the bench and she's running again. But we also have a number of Black Women Lawyers Association of Michigan members who are running for judge and Wayne County Third Circuit. As I understand it, Chandra Baker is running for a seat. And I believe there's one other individual. I'm not sure if she's a BWLAM member. Do you know, Your
Honor? Shakira Hawkins?
Shakira, yes, thank you. Yes, Shakira. What is her last name?
Hawkins.
Right. Yes, her last name escaped me. And she is also running for Third Judicial Circuit Court. So that will be very interesting. We're going to circle back and talk more about some of the races. But we have another question. What is the deadline to register to vote in the primary and the general election this year? That's a good question. Do you happen to know?
Yes, actually. And you can actually register to vote, and you can request an absentee ballot all in the same day, even on election day. And but you have to go to your local clerk's office in order to do that. If you're going to request registration and an absentee voters ballot, then you're going to have to do that a little bit before the election. So let me look here. So I have some dates that I want to give to the individuals.
Oh, great.
All right. So one, keep in mind, and I just want to go back a little bit. In order to register to vote, there are certain things that you have to do. You have to be eligible. So I want everybody to know that in order to be eligible, you have to be a Michigan resident at the time you register to vote, and you also have to be a U.S. citizen, at least 18 years of age when you vote. So actually, someone who is 17 can actually register to vote if they're going to be 18 on the day of the election. So I want all the youngsters, all the young people out there to know that you can register to vote. Also, you can register to vote. A lot of people don't know that if you are an individual who has been previously convicted of a felony, you can, or you've served some time in a jail or prison, you can also vote. The only time that you are ineligible to vote under those circumstances is if you are currently serving a sentence of incarceration. So if you've already been sentenced, even if you're awaiting trial, you're awaiting arraignment, or you're awaiting sentencing, you can vote by absentee ballot, even if you're incarcerated. But if you're sentenced, then you're ineligible to vote. So individuals that want to request an absentee ballot, you can request an absentee ballot to be mailed to you, and that request has to be received by your clerk's office no later than 5 p.m. the Friday before the election. Okay, so if you're already registered at your own address, you can request an absentee voter ballot in person at your clerk's office anytime up to 4 p.m. the day prior to the election. But if you request your absentee ballot the day before the election, you must vote. You must vote in person at your local clerk's office. So you really, if you go to your clerk's office, you can vote. You can register to vote and vote by absentee ballot on the same day. But if you do it by mail or other means, you have to give it a little time.
Right. So I reside in Wayne County, and unfortunately, I have not been able to get in touch with my clerk's office, my local clerk's office. Now, I know that varies from city to city. So I know some cities are different, but, I'm already registered. So I'm doing a lot of my things up on the Michigan.gov website.
Yes.
But so it varies from city to city. And hopefully, during this pandemic, you can access your local clerk, and that goes into the issue of disenfranchisement. Because of this pandemic, it is impacting the ability for people to get connected, and so that's why If, push comes to shove, you can go to, Jocelyn Benson is our Secretary of State here in Michigan, and she has put up this website. Well, it existed prior to, but we now have the Michigan Information Voter Center, and you can do so much. You can accomplish so much through that as well. So that's just a fail-safe, a backup for going direct to your clerk's office. And I'm so glad, Your Honor, that you went over the eligibility for voting in the state of Michigan, because there's always been some confusion. If someone is a returning citizen, would they still be able to vote? And unlike other states like Florida, which has tried to usurp, the rights of returning citizens, that's been very controversial. But if somebody is temporarily detained, and would they still be able to vote? They're not convicted. They're just waiting to make bond. Would they still be able to vote?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You can vote by absentee ballot. And so it's only if you are sentenced and you're currently serving your sentence are you ineligible to vote. And then once your sentence is done, you have to re-register and your voting rights are automatically restored.
Oh, that is very good to know, because some people were not aware of the process, that they do have to re-register and then they're good to go.
That's correct.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you. So go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, that is one of the biggest misconceptions,
Sure.
is that people that are convicted of a felony believe that they don't have the right to vote. And they're in some areas, in some states, they do not have, their rights are not automatically restored, and they don't have the right to vote if they've been convicted of a felony. But in Michigan, you do. And I want everybody to get out in this election and exercise your right to vote. Your vote matters. Your voice matters. And the power, the power of this country, the power of the government comes from the people. And we have to really understand that the way that we're going to affect change is by voting in these elections.
Thank you, Your Honor. One thing about the judicial races is that sometimes people, they simply forget to that the races, frankly, are on the ballot. And so what would you say to that? When they get the ballot in the mail, if they, get the absentee ballot, here's my sample ballot. All the races, obviously, they can't fit on one page. So what would you say to that, Your Honor?
I would say that it's important that individuals flip the ballot over and vote for your judges, because most often your judges are on the back and at the bottom of your ballot, and people usually tend to vote for the top of the ticket, or races that matter to them, and they kind of forget about your judges. And so I encourage everyone to flip over the ballot. On the back, you usually find your ballot initiatives, and you will find your judges from the Michigan Supreme Court to the your local district court judges. So at every level in this election cycle, you'll see your judges on the ballot. So judges get less coverage than other races, but judges are very important. Judges can affect just about every aspect of a person's life and well-being. Judges are very instrumental in changing the law, changing the way that people go about they have a very great effect on our well-being. And so we have to take care in choosing the judges that we put on our bench, because they decide important cases that can change the direction of our country, the direction of our community, and we have to be a part of that. So you got to do your research when you are flipping over the ballot and you see judges on your ballot. You have to look at, not just look at the names and just choose one. You have to actually go online and do research. Go on Facebook. You can contact your local bar associations and get information about these candidates. You can even, go to certain websites because there are associations and organizations that rate these candidates. And so you want to get as much information about the judges that sit on your bench and are going to, make decisions about someone's freedom. They're going to make decisions about your family. They're going to make decisions about, that affect you financially. So
Right.
it's really important.
Right. And one thing I recommend to people who are going out and voting is that they really should have a plan, especially if they plan on actually showing up to the polls. With the pandemic on, it's most likely still going to be with us. So I think they should have a plan as to what time they're going to go to the polls and have their PPE. But I would also ask that voters, when they get their ballot, whether it's by absentee, if you're getting it at home, your ballot at home, or you're going to the polling place, I would ask that you start, on the back of the ballot or the second or third page. Start with those races first and then work your way up to the front page. Because as you said, Your Honor, I mean, judges have so much impact over people's lives. And this year, we have judicial races on all levels. We have probate court. And so, unfortunately, because of this pandemic, so many people have lost their loved ones. They need to
Yes.
open up estates, decedent estates. They need to take care of business. They might need to get a guardianship or something for a loved one, or a conservatorship. And the probate courts are, for the most part, doing business by email and fax filings and electronically. But that's important, right? I mean, that's important to someone's life. So we have probate court, we have district court. If Your Honor could explain about the difference between district court and circuit court.
Oh, absolutely. Your district courts are going to be like your local courts. That would be the court that you would go to if you have a ticket. That would be the court that you would go to if there's like a landlord-tenant issue. If you have a civil matter that's under $10,000, so small claims. If you go to your district court, you're going to see judges that are in your district or your community. So, for example, the city of Detroit has a district court, which is the local court, and that's 36 district court. And in the city of Southfield, there is the district court, that's 46 district court. So the district courts are most commonly where people go to kind of conduct their business there. If you park in a spot and your meter expires, you're going to go to the district court for that. For your misdemeanors, you will go to the local district courts. And the district courts are very important, and people need to understand the district court judges are the judges. If you are facing a felony charge, will determine whether or not that case moves forward to the next level, the higher court, the circuit court, the trial courts. And so the circuit court is where you're going to, handle your felony cases. The circuit court is where you're going to handle the civil cases that have more in controversy, or there's more money involved in those cases. There is the family division at the circuit court, which handles your divorces, your child support, your custody matters. There's the juveniles that come into the family division courts at the circuit court level. You have your abuse and neglect cases, your PPOs. I mean, they do adoptions. There's a variety of different cases that are handled at the circuit court. So your circuit courts are called your trial courts. That's usually if you have a matter, your criminal case. It starts at the district court, and the district court decides whether your case is dismissed or whether it continues on with some or all of your charges, and then it's continued on for trial at the circuit court level, which is why they're called the trial courts. So, and that's
Very
usually
good.
covering our county. So Wayne County Circuit Court, which is the third circuit court, Oakland County Circuit Court, which covers all of Oakland County. So that's the next step up. And then you have your appellate courts, which are like your intermediate courts. And then you have your Supreme Court in Michigan, which is the court of higher jurisdiction in the state of Michigan.
Right. Wow. So thank you for that quick crash course on the courts. But I mean, that just it really illuminates for all of us why it's so important to, flip that ballot and vote for judges, because as you just ran down, Your Honor, I mean, there's just a wide range of impact on our lives. So I greatly thank you for mentioning that. And you going through the whole litany of courts and the jurisdictions. And, you had mentioned earlier about the voters have to educate themselves about who the candidates are for judge. And as Your Honor said, there are bar associations. One that comes to mind is the Detroit Metropolitan Bar Association actually will give a rating to a judicial candidate all the way up from not qualified to the top, which I believe is outstanding. And, there's not qualified, there's qualified, outstanding. I think outstanding might be the highest level, but
well qualified, and then
well qualified.
and then
Yes.
outstanding.
And I personally find that very helpful. I always check it out. But there are other organizations that also rate judges. And but there's no excuse, because everybody's got a smartphone, or most people do. And some people have access to the internet, and you can read up on the judges. And I do believe that Black Women Lawyers Association of Michigan is attempting to put together a forum, a candidates forum, but there are other groups as well. And if you can, find out about those, it would be a good time to check them out. And now, you can watch them from the comfort of your home, because they're all going by Zoom, right, Your Honor?
That is correct. And you have the Wolverine Bar Association that rates candidates.
Right.
We also have the Women Lawyers Association of Michigan that rates candidates as well. And you have the League of Women Voters. They don't rate the candidates, but the League of Women Voters does give a candidates forum, and that it is available for the individuals that are wanting to know more about their judges or any candidates. They give candidates forum on all of the various races. So you can learn about your judges through the League of Women Voters as well. So I would just encourage everybody to find out just as much as they can about their judicial candidates, because as I stated before, they said, long-lasting precedents. Judges can make social changes, and judges affect just about every aspect of our lives. If you walk across the street and you what you would consider to be jaywalking, that is something that can land you in court. Something minor with your vehicle, it can land you in court, whether it's a traffic accident or a traffic violation. Family disputes can land you in court. So disputes with your neighbor, all variety of different issues. You bankruptcy. So you just trying to settle your estates of your loved ones can have you, land you in court. So you just really need to take extra care. Judges, keep in mind, judges are nonpartisan. So there are no party affiliations with judges, and people tend to view judges as politicians, and judges are not politicians, and they're not affiliated with a political party. And there's an important reason why, and that's so that they can be fair and impartial, and you can make the decisions that you need to make, because a lot of times we make decisions that are very difficult decisions. And if you make them based upon your affiliation with a party or your affiliation with any organization, you're not an independent thinker. And so we put people on the bench to be courageous, to be independent thinkers. And you take your fight and your love for your community and for the people onto the bench with you. And you want justice for everybody. And so you want to make sure the process is fair. So look at their background, look at their legal background and what they did before they got on the bench. Look at the way that they interact with people. And, we call that judicial temperament.
Yeah.
Are they open-minded, fair? Are they someone that you can communicate with and that will hear you? Are they someone who is trained in the law and has a lot of experience in different areas, and can make a decision? Are they involved in their community? Do they care and know what's going on in the community that surrounds them? That is important too, just as
Yes.
much as anything else, to know what's going on in your community and have a touch, with the people. When
Yes.
I walk around my community, people know me. They know in various organizations I stay very active, and that is important to me. So,
Very good.
who your judge and how they interact in the community is just as important too. So
Very good.
consider all
Very.
those things.
Yes, and I'm so glad that you talked about community connection, Your Honor, because that is so very important, and it does. I do believe it does impact judicial temperament and how a jurist, treats people, frankly, from the bench, and when they appear on the bench, and leave the bench, all of that. It all comes into the equation, and it just serves everybody well. And I do want to mention that we also have some interesting prosecutor races in this election cycle. In Wayne County, Victoria Burton Harris is actually challenging the incumbent prosecutor, Wayne County Prosecutor Kim Worthy. And then in Oakland County, there's actually a hot race forming between the incumbent Jessica Cooper, and I believe she's being challenged by a former judge, Karen McDonald.
Oh, absolutely. So, the prosecutor's race in this election cycle is important as well. It's been a race of interest to a lot of different people because of the call for reforms in our justice system. And it starts with the top official that is overcharging individuals with crimes, or in our community, and even with the juveniles as well, or bringing petitions on behalf of the juveniles in Oakland County. So it's important that you have someone that you have confidence in, someone that has the interest of the people, and is there to safeguard the communities, but also to make sure that the individuals that are part of the system have the tools and resources in order to be reformed and return back to society, and don't have to get themselves caught up in a cyclical cycle. So I would encourage individuals to look at the prosecutor's race as well. I would say
Yes.
there are a lot of different. This election cycle is important because there are so many things at stake, and when you go into either the voting booth at your voting location, or you sit down at your kitchen table and you're going through your absentee ballot, your decisions are going to make a difference from the top to the bottom. It's not just choosing your presidential candidate, because people don't realize your presidential candidate has an impact on who you see on your Supreme Court. And,
Yes.
so you really have
Excellent
to
point.
take great care in choosing the candidates.
Yes, I agree, Your Honor, wholeheartedly. And I also would like to mention that there is a hot prosecutor race forming or shaping up in Washtenaw County. We have BWLAM member Ariane Slay. She's a former Ann Arbor city attorney. She is running for prosecutor along with Elise Savitt and Hugo Mackin. They recently did a forum by Zoom. This is a nonpartisan broadcast here, but this Zoom candidates forum was brought to the people by the Western Washtenaw Democrats, and it's an open seat because the incumbent prosecutor, Brian Mackey, he's not running. He's not seeking re-election. And then we have Elaine Washington. You mentioned earlier about the district court judges, judicial races, I should say, Your Honor. And Elaine Washington is running for judge, as I understand it, in 14B District Court in Ypsilanti. She's a BWLAM member. And also we have Alexandria Taylor, who ran previously for state representative, and I was very impressed with her campaign for state representative. She is now seeking a judgeship in the 34th District Court in Romulus, and that will be an interesting race to watch. And then in Macomb County, Eric Smith is not seeking re-election. He's got some legal problems, frankly, right now. But Pete Lucido is, and he's had some issues of his own. I won't go into any of those details, but he's running for prosecutor in Macomb County as well. I believe there's another challenger. His name escapes me. So we've got some hot races happening, and it's exciting to me. To me, it seems like people would want to go out and vote, and like you said, Your Honor, earlier, it's empowering. You're empowering yourself and your future.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I want to say, because there's some people that are kind of like on the fence and they don't know if they want to go out and vote. Maybe they're not excited about, maybe the candidate that they wanted, doesn't make it through the primary election from the top of the ticket on down. I encourage you to go out and vote, even if your candidate did not make the cut, because we can't afford to just sit it out. Your vote matters, your voice matters, and so we can't just sit it out. We have to exercise the right that so many people before us fought and died for us to be able to exercise. So our vote does have power. It does matter, and you never know. Your vote could be the difference between someone who is going to do an excellent job and is there for the people, or someone that you really don't know, or someone that may not be the better candidate. So but there's some great races, great people that are running for office, and I think that that's the best way to get involved in your community and to give back to your country is to serve in that capacity. Some people, they participate by serving and defending our country in the military. You can serve in another way by running for elected office and making a difference in your local area, or on a statewide level or a national level. So get involved in whatever way makes you comfortable. Get involved.
Excellent point, Your Honor, especially in the context of police reform. Everyone's talking about police reform, and I do think that you'll see more and more people getting out and running for office because they want to help affect change when it comes to police reform. But I do want to circle back to Oakland County, because I did mention that Jessica Cooper, who is the incumbent prosecutor, is being challenged by Democrat Karen McDonald, and I believe she vacated the seat and you took her seat. You were appointed to her seat. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Interesting.
So she had actually was on the ballot in 2018 for her reelection, and she won the election in 2018 and retained her seat for another 6 years. But 3 months into that term, she stepped down in order to run for prosecutor. And that gave me an opportunity to apply for that appointment and to, in a sense, make history, because there had been a considerable amount of time that had gone by since an African American had been on the bench at the circuit court. So I'm the 75th judge, and I'm the third African American judge to sit on that bench.
Wow.
And there are not many family court judges that are African American. So it's important. It's important,
Yes.
and I, take my my duties and my service to the public very seriously. And I just want to make sure that everybody has access to justice, and everybody has a voice, and that their voice is heard. And you may not always agree with the judge in their judge's ruling, but at least I want people to walk away knowing that I was in that my decision was an informed decision, and also it was with thought, and it had the greater good in mind. So you just have to think about the candidates that you're choosing, whether it's for your county exec, or your treasurer, or for your state rep, or it's your judge. You think about who represents you the best, and who would be your best representative in that capacity.
Yes, Your Honor. And if I may say, Your Honor, I knew you as an attorney, and you were always the most prepared attorney in the courtroom, and so eloquent, and you just fought so zealously for your clients. And I know that all of your qualities as a member of the bar also follow you as a jurist on the bench. And I got to say, take the opportunity to say I'm very proud of you, and thank
Oh,
you for
thank
everything
you.
that you've done. Thank you so much for your service. And so I don't want to exclude the Republicans. There is a Republican in the race for prosecutor. Lynn Getz is running for prosecutor as well. And then, there's that hot race for Oakland County Executive between the incumbent, David Coulter, and Andy Meisner, and Dave Ferris is in that race, and Mike Colwall, and Jeffrey Nutt. And then there's also the sheriff race. Vincent Gregory is in that race with Barnett Jones. And of course, our incumbent, Michael Bouchard. And there's one other individual. I don't know if that's Randy Maloney. I don't know if his name is, I can't see his last name. But then also for clerk and register of deeds in Oakland County, treasurer, and water resources commissioner. So lots to choose from, lots to vote for, as Your Honor indicated. Now it's 12:46. Can I get you for a few minutes longer for a lightning
Oh,
round on these
oh,
questions? Okay,
absolutely.
thank you, Your Honor. So I'm just going to go through these. And so our next question is, do I have to show my voter registration card in order to vote?
Now, you do have to have identification when you go to your polling location. So, if you were to go to your Secretary of State and you need some sort of identification in order to cast your ballot so that they know that you are the right person who's voting. So, make sure, in order to register to vote, you must fill out your application, and then when you fill out your application, you can take certain types of identification with you. And let me just read out the list if I can. The
Sure. Thank
acceptable
you.
documents, okay? Because you do have to show proof of where you live, and the documents must show your name and current address, and you can even show a digital copy of the document. So the
Oh,
acceptable
good.
documents are your Michigan driver's license or your state ID. You can show a current utility bill, a bank statement, a paycheck or a government check, or other government document.
Great. That's good to know, especially about the digital copy. That is, wow, that's priceless. Because I did not know that. So that is good to know.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
if someone doesn't have their identification with them when they vote, but they're a registered voter, as I understand it, Your Honor, they can fill out an affidavit and
That's
they'll still be able to
correct.
participate?
That is
Okay.
correct.
Okay.
That is
Very
correct.
we going moving on,
There
going
have been
forward.
problems in the
Oh, go
past
ahead.
with that. So,
Oh,
you just make sure that if you don't have your identification, that you do ask for, you ask to fill out the affidavit so that you can exercise your right to vote. So
okay.
that is available. People need to know that. You shouldn't be denied the right to vote because you don't have your identification, because you can fill out that affidavit.
Okay, very good. And then the next question is, I'm in the military and my partner works overseas as a civilian. How can we vote this year?
Now, people that are in the military, they have additional options in order to register or to vote. And so there is a website that you can go to if you fit into that category, and that's fvap.org.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. And as I understand it, really, military and overseas civilians are the only individuals who can vote online. They can actually vote online.
Yeah, there are options for them. And I want to say that their registration, and I may not be quoted, but I believe their registration is good for a year.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. That's good to know. Yeah. And so now moving on to early voting. Someone asked, does Michigan allow early voting?
Okay, your sound is a little.
Let me move closer. Someone asked if Michigan allows early voting. As I understand it, the answer is yes, but it has to occur 45 days.
Okay, I think we lost Tracey.
Okay, I'm back. I don't know what's going on. There must be a lot of traffic in my area or something. I do apologize. But the question was, before I got bumped off, does Michigan allow early voting? And do I need an excuse to vote absentee?
You do not need now in Michigan, due to the passage of a statewide ballot proposal, all registered voters may request what's called an absentee voter ballot. And it could be provided to you for no reason. So once you get your absentee ballots, and they'll be mailed out, and it kind of within a couple days or so of depending of your local clerk or township, but they'll be mailed out in about a week. And once you get your ballot, you can get it and you can vote, and then you can send it back even the same day if you'd like to. And you can take it directly. You can take your ballot and you can mail it. You can take your ballot and you can take it directly to the clerk's office and turn it in there as well. So there are a lot of a variety of ways that you can vote. You don't have to just vote on election day. Your absentee ballot will allow you to vote as soon as they're mailed out by the clerk. And if you have requested an absentee ballot, you can mail it in as soon as you receive it. And you can even change your mind. So if you get an absentee ballot and then you decide that you want to vote in person, you can do that as well. But they make it convenient for you to vote in the privacy of your home, especially with COVID-19 and the concerns, the safety concerns.
Right. And then, there are cases where a candidate might drop out of a race, might withdraw, and so someone might want to spoil their ballot and vote again. And as I understand it, they can request a new absentee ballot be mailed to them. Or as the runner said, they can go and vote the polls, but the request must be received by 2 p.m. the Saturday before the election if they're going to receive a new ballot by mail. Is that your understanding?
Yes, and this happened in our primary for our presidential candidates in March, and so by the time individuals voted, some of their candidates might have already dropped out of the race, but they were still on the ballot. And so if you voted early by, absentee ballot, and your candidate dropped out, you had the ability to go and to request that your ballot be spoiled, and that you get a new ballot to vote for your next best candidate. So,
right.
as
Your
long
Honor,
as
can you hear me? I just got a message that sound is low.
the sound, I can hear you. It was it's there are times where it is a little low, but I can
Yes,
still
and
hear you.
I can barely hear you, so I don't
Oh,
know what's going on. Okay, so well, let's just keep it moving. The next question is, can I wear election-related clothing to the polls?
you know, and I actually can answer this. I actually ran before I got appointed. I ran for judge. And I like to, before COVID-19, I like to vote in person. And I had my T-shirt on. You cannot wear that into the polling location. So I had to put a jacket over my T-shirt that had my, my logo on it, because it's not allowed. I wasn't allowed to, hand out any materials to anyone inside of the polling location. They want everybody to be able to vote securely, and that their vote is free from, I guess, interference from other individuals, or influence of some kind. They want you to be able to go into the voting booth and make your own choices and feel comfortable doing so.
Okay, very good. And some people, if they get caught with, wearing a shirt that someone considers to be campaigning or electioneering, they can always turn it inside out as well if they don't have a jacket, and they can go
Yeah.
someplace where they can, change in privacy. Um, and so, a couple of questions I do want to cover before we wrap up. Someone asked, must I vote the entire ballot?
You don't have to vote the entire ballot, but I want individuals to resist the temptation to cherry pick on the ballot, because this election cycle is so important. And research the candidates and get to know them, and make a choice, and have your voice be heard. We have to have representation in all aspects of this system, and of our process. So choose a candidate, get to know them, research them, but you could choose to only vote for, let's say, in November for your president. But I would encourage you to choose for all of the candidates.
Very good, very good. I don't know if I'm going to lose sound, but it just seems like there's some interference. This might have to be the last question, Your Honor. This is a very important question too from someone. Can I vote a split ticket? Can I vote a split ticket?
Well, in your primary election that's coming up, you're going to be choosing your partisan candidates. So, in this case, it's not going to be feasible. Your ballot actually is going to be spoiled if you do so in the primary election.
Okay, okay, very good. And you can still hear me though? You can still hear me? Okay, well, let's just keep it going until as long as we can, so we can wrap up these questions. Someone wants to know, and I found this question to be very intriguing. Can voters be challenged based on a home foreclosure? So I guess, the thought process is, well, if I'm losing my home and I'm not going to be living in that particular address anymore, could someone like, these poll watchers, well, they're not really poll watchers, but they challenge people at the polls. Could they challenge me because I'm going through a home foreclosure?
That is actually a very good question. So someone is
Well,
asking.
I did a little research on it, and as I understand it, that in terms of someone going through a home foreclosure, apparently this issue came up before, and Republicans and Democrats agree that a foreclosure is an insufficient
Right.
basis to challenge a voter at the polling place. And how would somebody know that anyway? So
Yeah. And if you're going through the process, that means that the process hasn't been completed, a decision hasn't been made. And so I think you have there would be no basis to challenge you if you're going through a home foreclosure.
okay, very good. And
If your
what
home
about
hasn't been taken from you, if your home hasn't been taken from you at that point in time, you have a right. There's a right of redemption period, where you can, where you can regain your property. So I think I don't really think that would be a basis, but that's actually a very interesting and good question.
That was a good one. And so moving forward, someone asked, can I use a camera in the polls? And this has come up a lot, in the age of selfies and everybody's got a cell phone or smartphone and they want to know, can I use a camera in the polls or at the polls? Doesn't
I would.
matter. If you have absentee ballot, I guess it's not a big deal if you want to take a picture of your ballot, but if you're at the polling place, is that different?
It's prohibited. It is prohibited.
It is prohibited. Okay. And then would throw in 2 cents. You cannot take a picture of anybody else's ballot, but apparently there was a new ruling that if you want to snap a quick shot of your own
Own.
ballot,
You can't.
your
You can't
own
take
though,
pictures. You can't
you
take
can do
pictures.
that, but that's it. Everything else, as Your Honor said, that's prohibited. And
And it's so that people can vote in a, it's confidential in a secure atmosphere. So
right.
taking pictures in a voting, location would violate someone's, privacy while they're trying to vote for their candidates. It's
Yes,
a private matter, and especially if you're in your own kitchen at your own kitchen table voting for candidates, you can do whatever you want. I mean, there are candidates that while they're filling out their absentee ballot, they may take a snapshot of the ballot, where they voted for themselves or someone else's vote, where they voted for themselves, and they place it on Facebook. I've seen that in the previous years where candidates say
I
I
have
voted and
too.
I voted for
Yeah,
myself. With your own ballot, that's one thing. Taking pictures inside of a voting location is
right.
prohibited.
And as Your Honor points out, it's supposed to be by secret ballot, not public ballot. So, right. And then just a couple more and we'll wrap up. Someone asked, do you know how long the polls will be open? And will there be extended hours this year because of the pandemic?
In general, the polls close. I believe it's eight. Is it 8 p.m.
Yes,
And so I'm not quite sure about the extended hours. That's a good question as well. I have not heard anything about extended hours.
I
I
haven't
do
either.
know that prior to the election day, the clerk's office, your local clerk, the clerk's office can have extended hours on the weekends. They can open on the weekends and have extended hours to accommodate people leading up to the election.
Okay, very good. And then if someone is being intimidated at the polls, um, are there any election protection hotlines, or what can I do if somebody is harassing me? I have seen this actually. Didn't happen to me personally, but there were some people at my polling place the last presidential election. I just thought it was really reprehensible, and we ended up calling the U.S. Department of Justice. But is there any place local that would you recommend, Your Honor, to reach out for help at
I
the
know that
polling
in the
place?
past, there have been individuals that may have called the NAACP. They've contacted the ACLU. They've contacted, their local clerk to advise the local clerk that they were having issues at the polling location. The county clerk was can be contacted. You can also alert the workers that are there, or you can even contact your local police department if there's an issue at the polling location.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Thank you. And I will share the number to the U.S. Department of Justice for anyone listening. If they just want to put this in their cell phones and just have it at the ready, you can call 1-800-253-3931. That's to the U.S. Department of Justice. You can also call the Michigan Bureau of Elections at 517-373-2540. Or you can call an election protection hotline. This is a little easier to remember. 1-866-OUR-VOTE, 1-866-OUR-VOTE, and that is 1-866-687-8. Couldn't see that for a minute. 8683. I'm wearing my blue lens glasses, and but as your Honor points out, there's going to be some local protection too. So tap into NAACP, National Action Network. The National Bar Association might also be out there, and there will be help.
Yes. And before we wrap things up, I do want to address another issue.
Yes.
And that is the census. So
Thank you, Your Honor.
I wanted to advise that it's important to return your census form. And so every decade, the population is counted, and the census determines the distribution of monies to your local area. And it also determines your congressional or seats, your representation in Congress. So it has a lot of political as well as funding ramifications. So the census is, everyone should be counted. It's private, and it is a short form. It's only 9 questions, and it's asking you about the people that live in your household, their ages, and it's just to get basic information. So you can respond to the census by mail. You can do it by phone, and there's a telephone number, and I believe it's 1-844 and 330-2020, or you can go online to my2020census.gov and complete the census. So it's critically important that individuals complete the census. It was sent out around March, so you may have received it. But if you've misplaced it, or you moved and didn't get it, you can go and you can fill it out by, as I indicated, by mail or by phone or online. So they make it very easy, and it's very quick. I completed it in less than 5 minutes.
Wow. Okay, great, Your Honor. Thank you so much for, making sure that we all knew about the census. And as I understand it, unfortunately, Michigan's got a very low return rate as it stands at 42%. We're not even breaking at 50%. And as Your Honor pointed out, there's so much that, hinges on the responses to the census. And at one point in time in Michigan, we actually had 19 congressional districts, and now we're down to 14, and we could be subject to losing yet another congressional district. So people have got to reply to the census. It just means so much.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And the federal funding, it affects us. So in order to be able for Michigan to combat, even COVID-19, and, have preventative measures in place, we have to complete the census and be counted. Everybody should be counted. Everybody matters. So, go ahead and complete your census so that you could be part of, the count, so that we can get the dollars for essential services. And also, like you indicated, for our congressional representation. So we stand to lose a seat. And so that's why the census is important.
Yes, thank you so much, Your Honor. And I do want to point out that there are a number of questions that she's answered, and she's put them in writing, actually. And so you'll be able to tap into to them on the Black Women Lawyers Association of Michigan Facebook page. They're not going away. You'll be able to reference them now, the primary, during the general election. And so whatever we did, Judge Gant has answered, and they're going to be there for you. So, don't forget to hit up that BWLAM, Black Women Lawyers Association of Michigan Facebook page for a wealth of information. And Your Honor, we'll close with you and let you have the last word. Is there anything that you want to say in closing?
I want to thank you, Tracey, for having this very important conversation with me. I want to thank the Black Women Lawyers
My
Association.
pleasure.
And this is, the Black Women's Lawyers Association is a great organization, and I'm very proud to be a member of this organization and to be part of the great things that you do in the community. So thank you for having me here to talk about this topic, and I want to say thank you to everyone that's supported me, and I am running to retain my seat, and so with your help, with your support, I can continue to do the great things in Oakland County that I started, and with my appointment on April 30th of 2019. So remember, not just me, but from the top of the ticket to your local elections, vote, get out and vote and have your voice heard. We have a lot of things on the table, a lot of issues on the table, and how they are handled will be determined on the leaders that we choose. So choose wisely and be informed. So thank you so much for having me here today.
My pleasure, Your Honor, and thank you for spending over an hour with us on educating everybody about their voter rights and their voter education. It was just so informative that now we have these additional questions and information that we'll be able to rely on in the future. So thanks so much, Your Honor, and I'll see you in court.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Okay. Okay, bye-bye now, bye-bye. So I just got a message from Chandrika Simmons, from Black Women Lawyers Association of Michigan. She's on the executive board and our former past president, and she says, keep going. And I apologize for any sound issues. I'm going to have to remedy that, but you heard from Judge Kameshia D. Gant of 6th Judicial Circuit Court in Oakland County, and she provided a wealth of information about, voter eligibility, how to even become eligible to vote, and how to register to vote. And yes, Chandrika says check your mic, but it's up to full power, so I don't know what's going on. Let's see. I don't know what's going on with my Okay, so I'm back. And so I just want to wrap up. Sorry for the technical difficulties, but I want to wrap up with a little retrospective, as I promised at the top of the broadcast, because there is so much going on. I mean, there's some serious questions out here about whether democracy can even survive in a pandemic. We just had a great discussion with Judge Kameshia Gant out of 6th Judicial Circuit Court. And in essence, she says, yes, democracy can survive during a pandemic. You just have to flex your muscles, to get out there and vote and participate in the process, whichever side of the equation you're on. This broadcast is nonpartisan. When you vote for judges, it's a nonpartisan process. But, there's a possibility that we may even have a disputed election this year, and that would pose an existential threat, I believe, to American democracy. But I want to circle back and give you a little historical retrospective in light of what's going on with specter of police reform in America based on the recent deaths of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and even more recently, Mr. Rayshard Brooks. And of course, there are a host of others. And so, in this country, 1844 was the date of the first police department that was ever established. It was in New York City. And then a year later, it was actually officially formed and incorporated. And it's interesting because in 1857, the Dred Scott came along. The Dred Scott case came along. That's Dred Scott versus Sanford. And Dred Scott was a slave, and he says, I'm a man and I want to be a citizen. I want, full citizenship. And many say that the Dred Scott decision is what precipitated or helped precipitate the Civil War, which eventually led to the end of slavery. And so it's interesting because the Dred Scott decision decreed that African Americans could not be full citizens. And so the Civil War, it jumped off in 1863. It jumped off prior to 1863, but the end of the Civil War occurred in 1863. And, we just went through Juneteenth. And so I've been online and I've noticed how some people were actually making fun of people who, the original people who experienced Juneteenth. Now, Juneteenth occurred on June 19th, 1865, but the Emancipation Proclamation was signed by President Lincoln back on January 1st of 1863. And so some have wondered, how could it take a whole, 2 years, or so many months for people in Texas? Juneteenth is all about General Granger, who rode in a Galveston, Texas, and he said, "You guys are free. You're free. You're free." And they call it Emancipation Day or Black Independence Day. Well, they didn't have social media like we have today. They didn't have the internet. They didn't have the telephones and things like that. So that's why General Granger rode in and let the Black people know who were slaves that they were now free. But going back to the Emancipation Proclamation that was signed by President Lincoln on January 1st, 1863, there were 3 million slaves at that time, Black slaves who were declared to be then and thenceforward and forever free. And the proclamation did exempt border slave states, though, that remained in the Union, and all or parts of 3 Confederate states that were still controlled by the Union Army. So then we have Juneteenth, June 19th, 1865. And this is the thing. Back to people making fun of the people not knowing that they were free. The official end of slavery did not occur until December 18th, though, 1865. Almost a full 6 months after Juneteenth, because that was when the 13th Amendment was actually adopted, and that officially ended slavery in America and ensured that, quote, "neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction." So the official end of slavery didn't occur, folks, until December 18th, 1865, 6 months after Juneteenth, and a significant period of time after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. So after the Civil War, you had this period of Reconstruction. And for the most part, Blacks and whites were mixing freely. And it's interesting because Congress actually adjourned in early March 1865 and would not reconvene until early December. And that was after President Lincoln's death. We know that he was shot and killed by John Wilkes Booth at that Ford Theater. And then Andrew Johnson, the vice president, he became the U.S. president. And this is a very important part of history. Andrew Johnson became U.S. president, and he had a full 9 months without any type of oversight to restore the nation. And so Johnson's quest was really, well, let me back up. Johnson was what they call a border state Democrat, and he wanted to really recreate antebellum America. He wanted to recreate the antebellum status quo. In other words, he wanted things to go back to the way they were before the Civil War without official slavery. And that is what triggered what they called the Black Codes in 1865. And that was when the Southern legislatures really tried to force freed people into a quasi-slavery. So in other words, they tried to force free Black people, freedmen as they call them, into a quasi-slavery. And so that produced riots in 1866 in Memphis and New Orleans. There were bloody race riots that convinced Northerners to abandon President Johnson's post-war Reconstruction policies. And then in 1867, we had the Military Reconstruction Act, where Congress actually divided 10 Southern states into 5 military districts that were actually overseen by Army officers. Then this is an important date. In 1868, we had the 14th Amendment, where our Equal Protection Clause comes in. Congress, they based Reconstruction on changing the Constitution to establish equal rights for all men. And so again, that was the birth of the Equal Protection Clause. Then in 1870, we had the 15th Amendment after the Georgia legislature expelled its Black members. Now, this is interesting because during Reconstruction, as I said earlier, you had Black people and white people. They were mixing freely, and Black people were actually, generating a certain amount of wealth. You actually had the election of Black people into elected offices, but all that would come to a screeching halt. The Georgia legislature in particular expelled all of its Black members, and then Congress passed the 15th Amendment, which guaranteed a citizen's right to vote, which cannot be restricted by race. That's very important. The 15th Amendment said that you can vote regardless of race. Then in 1875, there's a case called Minor versus Happersett. And in Minors versus Happersett, the Supreme Court decided that citizenship does not convey the right to vote, the important case. And that case in particular denied women the right to vote. And as you know, this year marks the 100th anniversary of the woman's right to vote, because it didn't happen for women in America until 1920, where women were bestowed with the right to vote. Then in 1876, you had election with white Democrats retaking control of the South. And then 1890 really was a touchstone for suffrage restrictions. The states across the Union restricted suffrage. And, when you hear suffragette, you think of with the women, fighting for the right to vote. But suffrage just means that people are fighting for the right to vote. And the women's suffragette movement was one of the movements under that umbrella. And so you did have this whole suffrage movement with states across the Union restricting or trying to restrict suffrage on the grounds other than race. And nevertheless, it ended up disenfranchising, unfortunately, many Black people. And so you've heard the term Jim Crow, and I'm sure that you've heard of the book, the monumental book by attorney Michelle Alexander, called The New Jim Crow, about the mass incarceration of Black and brown people. And so, I want to circle back to the old Jim Crow. And some people wonder, well, where does that name Jim Crow come from? Was it a real person? No, Jim Crow was not a real person. That it's really a negative, pejorative phraseology that came from an old Southern song called Jump, 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 Jim Crow. And, I mentioned about the Black Codes, and Jim Crow really exemplifies how Black people were disenfranchised from being able to vote, because during the Jim Crow era, post-Reconstruction, in order to vote, Black people we were subjected to what they call poll taxes. So in other words, you had to pay to vote. Like if someone would say, well, you owe this tax on something and you've got to pay X amount of money to vote. Well, people didn't have it because you shouldn't have to pay to vote, correct? And then another type of poll tax was owning property. There was a mandate that in order to vote, you had to own property. That's why this question that we had previously from someone who asked, if I am undergoing a home foreclosure, can I still vote? And the answer is yes. You know, in 2020, yes, that has no bearing. But then during the Jim Crow era, if you didn't own property, you were out of luck. You couldn't vote. And then there were the literacy tests. Black people, people of color, were subjected to having to undergo a literacy test. They had to prove whether they could read and write and spell. And, you know, at that time, there were a lot of poor and disenfranchised underclass white people who couldn't read, write, or spell either, but they were still allowed to vote. And how and why did that happen? It was because of what they call the grandfather clause. If you had a grandfather in America who voted, then you could vote. It didn't matter if you couldn't read, write, or spell. And that is how Black people were further disenfranchised from voting. So this moves us to 1892. There was an incident on a railroad car with a gentleman by the name of Homer Adolph Plessy. And he was a gentleman who was, as I understand, a 7/8 white and 1/8 Black. And if you saw Homer Adolph Plessy, you might mistake him for a white man. Well, some people describe Homer Adolph Plessy as being the forerunner of Rosa Parks, the mother of the civil rights movement here in the United States. Well, Homer Plessy, he got onto this railroad car, and at the time, you know, there was segregation because of the Black codes, and he wasn't supposed to really be in the railroad car, but he got onto the railroad car. They actually had railroad cars for Black people, colored people, and white people. And he was in the white car, and he got entered the railroad car, and he announced that he was the Black man, and that caused all types of chaos. And they threw him off the train, and it resulted in the suit Plessy versus Ferguson, the famous lawsuit that stands for separate but equal. Which resulted in what they call these public accommodations, where, you know, white people would have, you know, white water fountains and public restrooms, and Black people would have their own separate water fountains and restrooms, and couldn't travel on the same trains and buses and what have you. And it was actually an 1892 incident, but the case didn't come along until 4 years later. And in 1896, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Plessy versus Ferguson that racially segregated public facilities were legal, so long as the facilities for Blacks and whites were equal. But we all know that separate never amounts to equal. And so the ruling constitutionally sanctioned laws barring Black people from sharing the same buses, schools, and other public facilities as whites, including libraries, and that is Jim Crow, okay? And that established, this seminal case established the separate but equal doctrine that would stand for the next 6 decades. Now, I want to take you up to 1946 because this is something that I learned in my research. And, you know, we've heard of Emmett Till and what happened to him when he was lynched in Mississippi. But have you heard of the blinding of Sergeant Isaac Woodward Jr.? He was Army sergeant who had just been honorably discharged from the World War II, and he was coming home. He was coming home on a bus, and while he was in transit, he needed to make a pit stop, and he just went to the bus driver and asked the gentleman if he could stop so he could make a pit stop to relieve himself. Well, apparently the bus driver, mind you, Sergeant Woodward is in full dress uniform. Instead of congratulating him and thanking him for his service, he begrudgingly stopped Sergeant Woodward, proceeded to relieve himself, got back on the bus. But when he went to the next town, there was a sheriff waiting for him, white sheriff, and he was dragged off that bus, and they proceeded to arrest him for causing a disturbance. And they took out these billy clubs and they beat Sergeant Isaac about the head. There's some sources that say that his eyes were actually gouged out. Other sources say that billy clubs ruined the globes of his optic nerves and his eyeballs permanently, and he was forever blinded. And so Truman was the president at the time, and he was so struck by what happened because this white sheriff was put on trial, but he was acquitted. And so Truman actually started a civil rights commission, which predated the Kerner Commission, which I'm going to get up to. That happened in July 1967, but really nothing came of it. And then in 1954, we had the other seminal case. You know, we had Judge Gant on, and when she was sworn in, it correlated with the Brown versus Board of Education decision. That was a decision that was argued by Thurgood Marshall, who became a U.S. Supreme Court justice. And using the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka was a landmark 1954 Supreme Court case in which the justices ruled unanimously that racial segregation of children in schools, in public schools, was unconstitutional. And Brown versus Board of Education is really one of the cornerstones of the civil rights movement, and it really did help establish the precedent that's the separate but equal doctrine when it comes to education and other services was not in fact equal at all. So that takes us up to, I'm ending this soon, but you got to stay with me because we've got three landmark pieces of legislation that came as a result of the civil rights movement. And in 1964, that includes the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and that ended segregation in public places and banned employment discrimination on the basis of race, color, religion, sex, and national origin. You know, recently we had this, huge decision by the Supreme Court that, now protects members of our LGBTQ community and also DACA, and so that's great. And so the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is considered to be one of the crowning legislative achievements of the civil rights movement. And of course, it was first proposed by our former president, John F. Kennedy Jr., who was unfortunately assassinated. And it survived strong opposition from Southern members of Congress, and it was signed into law by JFK's predecessor, Lyndon B. Johnson, LBJ. And in subsequent years, the Congress has expanded the act a number of times and passed additional civil rights legislation, such as the Voting Rights Act, which I'm getting to in just a moment, which was passed in 1965 in connection with the 15th Amendment. And then, about that time, the Voting Rights Act was passed on August 6th. A couple of weeks later, poor Emmett Till was being lynched in Mississippi on August 28th. The symmetry of these events, with a Voting Rights Act passed and all the civil rights legislation, yet you have this young man lynched. It's just horrific. But we did have the Voting Rights Act passed. It's a landmark piece of legislation in the United States that prohibits racial discrimination in voting, and it was signed into law also by President Johnson during the height of the civil rights movement on August 6, 1965, and Congress later amended the act 5 times to expand the protections until something terrible happened in 2013. That's when the Supreme Court of the United States and Justice John Roberts actually rolled back what is called preclearance and other protections. And I'm going to talk about more about that in just a moment, and then we'll be wrapping up. I do want to mention 1967 was the Loving case, and it precipitated June 12th as Loving Day. Loving versus Virginia, 388 U.S. 1967 was a landmark civil rights decision of the Supreme Court, where the court ruled that laws banning interracial marriage violate the equal protection and due process clauses of the 14th Amendment. And now we have the Loving Day. And so also in 1968, we have the Fair Housing Act, and that prohibited discrimination concerning the sale, rental, and financing of housing based on race, religion, national origin, or sex. And it was intended as a follow-up to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And the bill was the subject of a very contentious debate in the Senate, but was passed quickly by the House of Representatives. And in the days after the assassination of civil rights leader Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the Fair Housing Act still stands as the final great legislative achievement of the civil rights era, and the struggle continues. So now I want to go back to what happened in 2013. So because of this decision in 2013, it's actually based on a case, Shelby County versus Holder, Eric Holder, the former U.S. Attorney General. And in Shelby County, the court's 5 Republican appointees declared unconstitutional the very core of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And the most consequential civil rights law in modern America, that was the Voting Rights Act of 1965. But the act and its subsequent reauthorizations designated certain areas, mostly the states of the old Confederacy, for special scrutiny of their voting rights practices. And so if these states wanted to make certain changes regarding their elections, if it came to redrawing boundary lines for legislative districts or determining the location of polling places, they had to obtain pre-clearance. But with this decision in Shelby versus Holder, it wiped that all out. And as a result, there are about 1,600 polling places that have been closed in the United States of America. So for decades, the pre-clearance process connected with the Voting Rights Act of 1965 operated as an effective check on discrimination in voting rights. But Justice Roberts' opinion asserted that the times have changed since 1965, as he put it, quote, the conditions that originally justified these measures no longer characterize voting in the covered jurisdictions. As a result, the court effectively ended pre-clearance, giving the states previously under scrutiny free rein to change their voting practices without first obtaining approval from the federal government. And so in practice, the Shelby County decision of 2013 has been a complete and utter disaster for voting rights, especially in communities of color, especially for Black people in particular. And so once again, it's been made clear that the shambolic primary election that was recently held in Georgia, I mean, this is because of the Voting Rights Act and what happened to it as a result of that Shelby decision. And so, here we sit today in the middle of a global pandemic, and, it was always going to be difficult to conduct elections in the middle of a coronavirus pandemic. But with what happened in Georgia recently with the long lines, people were not able to social distance. They ran out of ballots. They didn't have enough staff. One person indicated that she had to wait 3 hours in line to vote. And when other places, the sites of other polling places were checked in the suburban areas, they didn't experience the same thing. And so we're seeing this happen in areas where poor people reside, where people of color reside. And ironically enough, Georgia, the state of Georgia, was a covered jurisdiction under the Voting Rights Act at the time of the court's opinion. And if the justices had not neutered the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the state of Georgia would have been required to clear its plans for the primary. So we have what I call the now Jim Crow. People of color are still facing obstacles in voting. What happened in Georgia is just a recent case illuminates that. And so I say that, these demands that are placed on holding free and fair elections are, just made worse. They're just taken up a notch because of this pandemic. And so it really is going to depend on you, the people. The people at the local level, you're going to have to do your best to fight for what the Voting Rights Act once delivered. And, today, thanks to Judge Kameshia D. Gant, she's answered a wealth of questions and provided answers to your questions about voting that are memorialized forever on Black Women Lawyers Association of Michigan's Facebook page. And those are the tools for your voting toolkit in 2020. And I say that lawyers and non-lawyers alike, you can help combat voter suppression by holding voter registration drives, getting the word out about absentee voter applications, you're not sending out the ballots, the Secretary of State's and the clerks are. And I do want to remind you that those absentee ballots are going to be hitting mailboxes next week, so you got to make sure that you fill them out and that when you sign them, your signature matches what's in the voting file. And if you do need help with election protection, it's out there. The National Bar Association, and the National Lawyers Guild, the American Bar Association, the ACLU, National Action Network, Black Lives Matter, and NAACP are all going to provide resources to help you. So I'm Tracey Martin. I'm an emeritus board member of Black Women Lawyers Association of Michigan, and this was the Black Women Lawyers Association of Michigan Voter Rights Special. Thank you for your attention. And I want to close with a very important quote from our former president, Barack Obama. And, as I leave, I don't even know that you'll be able to hear this, but I just want to play a few bars from a song called God Made Us All by Lord Invader. And it was a song that memorialized what happened to Sergeant Isaac Woodward Jr. When he returned from service, honorably discharged, and he was beaten. But President Barack Obama says that everyone should have the right to vote safely, and we have the power to make that happen. This should not be a partisan issue. Thank you for joining us, everyone, and stay safe. And I do hope that you exercise your right to vote in 2020. Bye-bye, everybody. And Lord Invader was an artist who often did calypso music. I don't know if you can hear it, but bye-bye.